Welcome to Lead Well, Live Whole. I'm your host, Michael Sirmon. Every episode, we'll spend a few minutes exploring the challenges, questions, and realities of everyday life, because success means little if you lose yourself in the process. So take a breath, settle in, and let's spend a few minutes exploring life together. Welcome back to the Lead Well, Live Whole podcast. I'm Michael Sirmon. And every week we explore practical ideas to help you think clearly, lead confidently, and live whole. Today's episode is one that hits close to home because almost every leader, almost every person I've coached has wrestled with this at some point, and that's overthinking. Not because we're not capable of thinking through a problem, and not because we don't lack the intelligence to answer it, but because often we care so deeply about getting it right. And this is different from that analysis paralysis that a lot of people deal with, right? This is something much deeper. This is something more tied to identity. So if you've ever replayed conversations, delayed decisions, researched something for weeks, or wondered why you can't seem to quiet your mind, then this episode is for you. There's a lie that we believe. And that lie is that most people think overthinking is caused by not knowing enough, and it's not. Most overthinking isn't an information problem, it's a certainty problem. We convince ourselves that if we just get one more opinion, read one more article, run one more scenario, eventually we'll feel completely confident. But certainty is a moving target, and the closer you think you're getting, the further away this seems. Now, there's a personality type that's analytical that automatically goes through this iterative thought process of digging deeper and having everything tied up, right? That's perfectly normal. This that we're talking about is outside of that, right? Smart people typically do overthink more. And that's one thing I've noticed, no matter what the field, no matter where they're at or what they're doing, that the smartest people, often struggle the most with overthinking. And for a lot of years, I asked myself why. And what I finally realized is because the smartest people can imagine every possible outcome. They often see risks that other people miss. They recognize unintended consequences. They understand complexity, and that's really a gift, right? But every gift has a shadow. And when intelligence loses clarity, possibilities become paralysis. And it creates a decision trap, right? So here's how that trap usually works. You face a decision, you begin analyzing. You discover another possibility, and that possibility creates another question, which leads to another scenario, then another. Soon you're no longer making a decision, you're managing an endless series of hypothetical futures, and every future seems possible. So what do? You wait. Not because you're lazy, but because your brain is trying to eliminate uncertainty, but life doesn't work that way, right? Often, all you have is 70% of what you need to make that decision. I did an interview one time with a college newspaper, and I was the mayor of our community at the time, and I was a fairly young guy, and the reporter asked me if I looked back at the decisions that I had made, what decisions did I regret? And I could honestly say I didn't regret any decision I had made. And she laughed and she said, well, so you say every decision you made was the right one? I said, that's not what I'm saying at all. There are a lot of decisions that I would make different from where I am right now. But at the time, I made this best decision I could with what I knew, right? I'd pulled my counselors. I had all the information in, and that was the best decision from what I knew at that time. Now, 10 years later, I see a different set of circumstances from this vantage point, which means I would make a different decision based off of where I am now than I did then. But I don't regret making the decision I made back then. Because in life, I know sometimes you have just enough information to make a decision, right? And you have to make the decision. Wars are lost. Futures are destroyed. Businesses often, one business deal hinges on a decision being made. Even the wrong decision is not catastrophic, right? Because even if that decision's taken me in the wrong direction, it's easier to change the direction of a vehicle in motion than it is one that's parked sitting still. There are a lot of reasons why we delay, though, right? And underneath overthinking, that's usually something much, much deeper, right? It's fear of making the wrong decision. It's fear of disappointing people. It's fear of looking foolish. Fear of losing something valuable. Fear of regret. We tell ourselves we're being careful, and sometimes we are, but sometimes we're simply afraid, and that's a big difference. Because there's a cost to delays that nobody really wants to talk about. We always think that indecision is neutral, but it's not. Every decision delayed is still a decision. Opportunities will expire, relationships are going to drift, teams will lose confidence in their leader. Momentum disappears. And meanwhile, our mental energy stays locked onto the same problem. So overthinking and delaying isn't free because it steals today's peace while trying to protect for tomorrow. Clarity doesn't come from thinking longer, and that surprises many people, right? Clarity rarely arrives because we think longer. It usually arrives because we think different. So instead of asking, what if this goes wrong? Ask, what matters most? Instead of asking, how can I guarantee success? Ask, what decision aligns with my values? Instead of asking, how do I eliminate every risk? Ask, what risk am I willing to live with? Right? Because they're different questions. I think they're better questions. And better questions lead to better thinking. Now, as we progress, it's going to create clarity, right? That's what I said a minute ago. I would not make the same decision today that I made 10 years ago because I have more clarity. I can see more from where I am right now, right? So that lesson really changed the way I lead, even as a young person, right? Because I understood that action creates information. As I move, people and situations can align with me, right? As I put my hand out, it can create value, which then creates its own energy, right? Action creates information. Thinking alone doesn't create more information. It's a data point. It's not information. And sometimes the only way to discover the right path is to start walking, right? Not recklessly, not impulsively, but intentionally. They used to laugh at me at the company I worked at because I used the word intentionality all the time, right? We are very intentional about what we're doing. We approach it with intentionality. We don't do stuff just to make changes for change's sake. We don't take direction just for direction's sake, right? But we are very intentional about it because even as a child, I understood that many decisions aren't permanent, that most of life is an experiment. I mean, even medicine's called the practice of medicine, not the art of medicine, right? It's not the science of medicine, it's a practice. And most of the time in everything I've been around, even in the medical profession, which I've never been in it, but I've experienced it a lot, it's the doctor says, well, let's try this. Well, then let's try that, right? They're experiments. Life is like that. We make decisions, we learn, we adjust, we continue. Because waiting for perfect clarity often is going to keep us from discovering the clarity that we're looking for. Think about that. Let me say it again. Waiting for perfect clarity often keeps us from discovering the clarity that we were looking for. So there are three questions I ask myself. Whenever I catch myself overthinking, I pause and ask 3 questions. First, am I solving a real problem or an imaginary one? Right? How much time and energy do we put into imaginary problems? How much of our peace today are we sacrificing out of what we're imagining is going to go wrong tomorrow? Right? The Bible says that sufficient unto today, right, are the troubles, are the problems, are the challenges, are all of that. Sufficient for today is today's, right? Don't think about tomorrow's. Think about today's. That doesn't mean don't plan. That doesn't mean don't set guards in place. But it does mean don't focus on them so much that we begin fighting imaginary windmills, imaginary dragons. The second question, do I need more information or do I simply want more certainty? And third, if I weren't afraid, what would I already know I need to do? And that last question, that's changed a lot of decisions in my life. Actually, more decisions than pretty much anything else. Scripture reminds us repeatedly not to be ruled by fear. Not because difficult decisions disappear, but because God promises wisdom to those who ask. Faith isn't pretending there are no risks. Faith is trusting that God's already present in tomorrow before we ever arrive there. Sometimes we're waiting for God to reveal the entire map. Often, He simply shows us the next faithful step and is waiting for us to take that step. I always laughed and said, that we talk about blessings, and I've always said, that faith and blessings always come with a shovel, right? They take our part of the equation. We have to do our part. In our journey, we have to take that next step. So we have to take that next action. We have to make that next call. We have to choose to forgive when the other person really isn't repentant at that point. We have to choose to follow hard through faith after something that we can't see with our eyes right now. If you've been overthinking lately, maybe the answer isn't another week of analysis. Maybe it's one courageous decision. Maybe it's one phone call, one conversation, submitting one application, offering one apology, taking one step. Remember, perfect certainty isn't the goal. Faithfulness is. Clarity isn't found by controlling every outcome. It's found by aligning our decisions with our values, our purpose, and our faith. Because at the end of the day, the best leaders aren't the ones who always make perfect decisions. They're the ones who make thoughtful decisions, the ones who learn quickly, but above all, the ones who keep moving forward. If today's episode encouraged you, I'd love for you to share it with someone who's carrying the weight of an important decision. And if you're finding value in these conversations, be sure to follow the podcast and leave a review. It helps more people discover the message. You can also learn more about leadership coaching and additional resources at michaelsirmon.com. So until next time, think clearly, lead confidently, and remember, lead well, live whole. If today's conversation raised a question you've been wrestling with, I'd love to help. I offer one-on-one coaching for individuals navigating pressure, transition, and important decisions. You can learn more at michaelsirmon.com.